This is a very big deal for game emulation, and it sends a clear message to Apple and to Nintendo and really to all big tech companies and game studios and game publishers that emulation is very well respected. It's very popular. People love it. People should get to decide what they do with their own iPads or iPhones. And probably the biggest message that I feel that it sends is that if you're going to limit the availability of your games, especially your older games, then people will find a way to make it happen and bring it to the devices that they already have. So just a couple weeks ago, Apple reversed their stance in a very monumental decision. It surprised everybody, including myself. So they reversed their stance on game emulation. They actually decided to start allowing game emulator apps on the Apple iOS store. This was after seemingly years, or at least a very long time, of continuing to take these apps down. Now, make no mistake, Apple was not willingly brought to this stance. Rather, that it seemed like they were pushed to have that stance. That is all thanks to recent policy changes that were made, especially in Europe, that dictates that Apple needs to start allowing third-party apps and some third-party app stores on Apple devices. It was a very big move, and thankfully it paves the road to, like I said, having game emulation possible on non-jailbroken iOS devices. Now, I want to stress this again. This was literally just 2 weeks ago. So fast forward to 2 days ago, an app gets added to the iOS App Store called Delta. It is a game emulator for a bunch of old classic Nintendo consoles, including the NES, the SNES, the N64, the Game Boy Advance, the Game Boy Color, and even the Nintendo DS. Now that is very impressive, I have to say. I think that's very cool and unique that this includes the Nintendo DS, but it makes sense considering iOS devices have obviously a touchscreen. So yeah, just 2 days ago, this app Delta bounces onto the iOS App Store. Well, in about a day, this app rose to literally the #1 position on the App Store. It is literally the most popular app right now. Nintendo has got to be absolutely furious. Of course, we all know their stance on game emulation. They have made it very obvious in recent months. Notably, Nintendo has actually not made a public stance or a public comment on this Delta app as of right now. We will see if they decide to make any efforts to take this down, but it also kind of shoves it in Apple's face as well. For years, they were so anti-third-party apps, and specifically anti-emulation. But like I said, it just kind of throws it in their face, but it especially, like I said, throws it in Nintendo's face. I have said it a ton before, and I will say it again. All of these big game companies and game publishers, especially Nintendo, they've got awesome classic titles, but literally no way to purchase like 90-95% of their game catalog, including digitally, which has got to be the easiest thing to implement ever. They have a way to play some big older N64 games on the Nintendo Switch, but this is very limited. It's very limited to just a few titles. It makes no sense that there are a ton of great games that are in Nintendo's catalog that are basically collecting dust. They're not being sold, they're not doing anything, and Nintendo refuses to sell them. It's just ridiculous. That's where a lot of these emulators come in. Now, make no mistake, the ROMs themselves, of course, are illegal. Like illegally downloading a ROM for a game that you don't own. Of course, Apple is not endorsing that. But now, with this new Delta app, they are making it possible. Like I said, we have yet to see a response from Nintendo. I'm sure it may be a very big response. But at least as of right now, this sends a very clear message to Apple and especially to Nintendo.